Our first speaker brings 25 years of experience in refining agile processes for some of the world's best-known companies. He's also a PhD researcher in psychology and psycholinguistics. Please welcome Joseph Perline talking to us today about psychological safety, which is necessary but not necessarily sufficient.
Hello, I don't know if you see me, but I had to laugh at that picture which was taken before COVID, back when I shaved my face. This talk is about some of my current research. It's a work in progress and something which I dare say might be state-of-the-art thinking on the topic of psychological safety. Everybody's talking about psychological safety. It's a buzzword now. It seems everyone is talking about it except psychologists. And this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this talk. And I'll be using Mentimeter for this. And this is an experiment I'm doing. Actually, the whole presentation is in Menti. So if you want to go in now, you can actually follow the slides there already. And then you won't have to change platforms just for the questions. Okay. So why am I doing this talk? The reason, best explanation comes from a friend of mine, Nora Dunbar, who says, as long as we real psychologists keep talking with each other and arguing with each other, which we do a lot, there will always be some slick pseudoscientists who are filling the void with their articles and their talks and their training programs. This is very dangerous. And we need to do a better job of communicating real science to the practitioners who can be helped by it. That's my goal, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this talk. So I want to ask you something. Why does this happen? As you might know, I'm Swiss, and there's a phenomena I notice quite often, for example, with our national football team. We get the best players in the country, some of whom are actually playing in other European countries and Champions League teams. We bring them together to play in the Swiss national football team. And what happens in the World Cup? We never get past the qualifying round. You must have seen this before, right? You get a group of exceptional individuals together. You think that they will become a great team, and they end up acting like a bunch of idiots. Have you seen that before? Do you recognize this? Did you ever ask yourself why something like this happens? So there are a number of people who have asked themselves this question. And one of the companies that did is Google, who did a research project called Aristotle, where they took a look at trying to find out what made a high-performing team. The thing is, science is a conversation. And in social science, even more than in physical science, right? Whereas physical science attempts to measure phenomena that are more or less observable, social scientists look at behaviors which, although they're observable, they might not be easily quantified and measured. The problem is that a lot of this research never gets out into the public, and that what does becomes really clickbait. And this is one of the problems with Google's research. It's clickbait. The only information you can really find about the original research came in an article in the New York Times, plus 2 pages on the Google's website. So let me show you that, for example. I hope you're in Mentimeter. So I would like to ask you a question, okay? Question coming up here. Let's do a little test. Okay, let's go into Menti, and without Googling the answer, type in your answer to this question. If not only psychological safety, what are the other factors that Google found necessary for successful teams? Could you please type your answers into Menti? What are the other factors that Google found necessary? Because it was more than one. Okay, let's take a look at the answers that came up. Any of them? cooperation, communication, expertise, fidelity, diversity. Salary, okay. Marital status, that's interesting. Respecting, engagement. Beer, definitely beer, yes. Seniority, emotion, same voice time, having a vision. Excellent, excellent. Let's go on. Let's see if any more come in here. Communication. Okay, you might be surprised about this. The other things that Google found were important. Oh, come on. There's still some answers coming in here. Let's wait a couple minutes, a couple seconds more. Okay. Good. Okay, let's go on. This is what Google found out was important. Being dependable, having some structure and clarity about the jobs that need to be done, having some meaning. People understand that their work means something to them and it has an impact that it means something to others, okay? So psychological safety is important, right? And face it, the word psychological safety sounds cool, right? We all know what safety is. And hey, psychology deals with humans. And since we're all humans, we're all psychologists. At least we try to act it to other people, right? So the problem is that this naive belief in what psychological safety is, that's something that frustrates us real psychologists, right? It reminds me of this quote. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means, right? Well, I understand psychological safety to be something that we would call a latent construct with all the connotations that entails psychometrically. Most people think that psychological safety is nothing else but this, right? Holding hands and singing Kumbaya after your retrospective. It's not that. Before we go on, I'd like to talk a little bit about psychological safety from a psychology perspective, okay? I think one of the best explanations for it comes from a dear friend of mine, a psychologist named Arabella Berger, who said, psychologically safe space is like a dance floor where you could be yourself. And if you think about it, going out on the dance floor, people are always hesitant to dance because they fear they might be watched. It might be uncomfortable in the beginning until you get enough people together that you have this shared feeling that you can be comfortable dancing. But what happens if people start looking strangely at you? What happens if people start leaving the dance floor? Then this feeling of comfort breaks down very quickly. So psychological safety is an aspect of culture. And culture is an emergent property. It's a derivative property that happens as a result of a process of social self-organization, okay? Since it's what we would call a derivative property, it can't be directly influenced. And it's very difficult to change it in a complex, resilient environment such as an organization. This is the reason why all those leadership workshops on culture or your team events that are aimed at getting you to work together better, they're not directly transferable to your working environment. And the changes they make tend not to last for very long. Also, even though there are companies now that say they can come in and convert your organization to psychological safety, and although the big consultancies are also launching a psychological safety practice, it doesn't work that way. Psychological safety isn't based on affection and liking people. It's based on trust. So what is trust? Trust, we say, that's the intersection of a person's hopes and fears. Trust is the currency of our human interactions. We don't trade in information. We don't trade in emotions or feelings. No, the amount of information we give someone, the amount of emotions we show someone, that depends on the trust we have for someone else. Trust is like the interest on your bank account. It takes a long time to build it up, but you can spend it or you can use it very quickly. Once lost, though, trust is very difficult or even impossible to regain. Trust can only be given. It can't be demanded. So how do these two things work together? Trust is a personal attribute. It's something that every person has, and that means it has both what we say contextual and dispositional moderators. You trust someone in a certain context, and the amount of willingness you have to trust depends on your disposition, depends on whether you're introverted and scared, depends on whether you're extroverted and open to risk or not. Psychological safety is an environmental attribute, okay? And Kurt Levin, here in the picture, says that the behavior of a person is a function of both the person and their environment, okay? So what happens, establishing trust is a way of reducing uncertainty. People don't like to be alone. They like to be together with others, interact with each other. But doing that puts them at risk of becoming dependent on others. And this risk tends to make themselves vulnerable. So what we as people go through is this challenge of saying, I want to be attracted to somebody, but I'm afraid of being hurt. So how do I know I can trust someone? And a lot of our human interaction is just doing some kind of testing to see whether we can trust each other or not. And the more we test someone, the more we see, oh, yes, I can trust this person in this situation to do this, the more comfortable we become, and the more a feeling we have in the environment of psychological safety. Okay? So my interest in this topic started a number of years ago, before the hype about psychological safety came up. And it came from a different direction, and namely some research on intelligence that I was doing in cognitive psychology at my university. And once again, it was a clickbait article in a magazine. Only this time there was some real published research behind it. Okay, and this research was on intelligent teams, and that was the article. What makes a team smarter? More women. So Anita Woolley, Tom Malone, Dave Engel, and the others, they started doing research on, do intelligent individuals make an intelligent team or not? And what they found out is that they don't. So anyone who knows something about psychological statistics knows R, Pearson's correlation, the correlation between C, which is general intelligence, and G, which is group intelligence, is minimal at the most. So the question is, what does make a team intelligent? What makes a team high performing? And in order to understand that and research that and quantify that, we have to make a question about what a team actually does. So I'd like you once again to go into Mentimeter and answer this question for me. What does a team actually do? When you say people are working together in a team, what do they actually do? So I'll give you some time to type in your answers, and then we'll take a look at what comes up. Okay, let's see if some answers have come up. A team organizes, they support each other, they aim for a shared goal, discuss, collaborate, work together towards a goal. solve problems together, divide tasks. Okay. Right. So a lot of the answers that we have here essentially are at the level, yes, we're working towards a common goal. That's something that defines a team. But that's not at the level of something that can be quantified and measured and something that we can work on improving. Okay. I must say there are a number of answers here that I see that are going in the right direction. So congratulations on that. So Joseph McGrath, a social psychologist, said that there are a number of things that people do when they work together in teams. And there are 4 major areas. People working together in teams, they have to generate new ideas. They have to be able to brainstorm new and novel thoughts. Second, they have to be able to choose between alternatives. And third, they have to negotiate and decide how to do something. And fourth, they have to execute on them. So as psychologists, what we do is we analyze how people work together on generating ideas, on choosing between alternatives, on negotiating, and on executing. So there are 2 ways that we can work on that. We can either ask people or we can observe them, right? Now, if you ask people, you always run the risk of having something that's called self-report bias. If you ask somebody something, they'll give you the answer that you want to hear. By observing them, you'll find out more directly about how they work. It's just something that takes a lot more time to do. But what we do when we do our research is we have teams do tests and exercises or games, and we observe how they act and how they interact in these type of situations. One of the things that we do, and this is an exercise you can do with yourself, do this with your team at the next retrospective. Have them solve a Sudoku in the team. You have 5 minutes time to solve a Sudoku. For every number you get right, you get 1 point. For every number you get wrong, you subtract 1 point. It's a simple, fun exercise to do. The most important thing is the number of squares, the number of numbers they get right, that's less important than their interaction and their problem-solving strategy. Okay? So this is just one simple sample exercise from a whole group of exercises that we do when we do our research. But if we want to go back to that clickbait, what Woolley and Engel and Malone and everybody discovered, that collective intelligence and high performance, it's not correlated with individual intelligence. There are 3 things that it's correlated with. It's correlated with social perceptiveness and awareness and empathy to the people around you. Secondly, it's correlated with equality and conversational turn-taking, with giving people space and letting them be able to say something, and also with people having the feeling that they're in an environment that they have the courage to say something. And third, they found out that it's correlated with gender diversity. Essentially, what they found out were that there were 3 factors that are interacting: empathy, psychological safety, and in a larger sense, diversity. So the way they measured empathy was by doing one of a number of psychological tests. The way they measured diversity, that's relatively simple to measure at least gender diversity. Measuring psychological safety, measuring the space that people were given to speak, was done this way. let's take a look at two different groups here. We have a group on the left and a group on the right. Now you can already see by the body language of the group on the left, there is one man there who is leading that group and speaking a lot. If we look at the data at the bottom, we see that both groups have a total speaking time of 10 minutes. The mean, the average speaking time, is 2.5 minutes per person. But the difference, which is what we're looking at, is a standard deviation. And what we're aiming for, the smaller the standard deviation, the closer the speaking times are to each other and the more equal people's speaking is. This is just a little example of the type of analyses that we do, okay? So one thing that we're looking here at is the quality of the interaction between people. Not only the fact that they interact, but the quality of the way they're interacting with each other. And so the current theory I'm working on is essentially that we need to have all three of these. Psychological safety alone is not enough. We have to have empathy or emotional intelligence. And we also need to have diversity. Because what happens if you only have two of those? If you only have empathy and psychological safety, but no diversity in terms of thinking, things like that, you get your user groups. You get the people who are all gathered together because they think the same way about things. You get politics, but you get no difference of opinion and no one challenging the thinking that's happening. If you have only empathy and diversity, but you have no psychological safety, people will think differently. They'll understand each other's different ways of views, but they're still afraid to speak. And nothing's really going to happen because people are hesitant to actually speak. And if you have psychological safety and diversity, but you have no empathy for others, what you get is essentially expressed in a movie from 1980s called Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, where essentially the whole story is that there are two old brothers who are billionaires and they make a bet on the nature versus nurture debate. They say they can take a young millionaire and put him out in the street and he'll survive equally well as someone, a beggar on the street, who they make into a millionaire. And they make a bet on that, but they don't care at all about the two men whose lives they're ruining by doing this. It needs to be the sweet spot, the balance in between. Because if you want to be successful going into the future, if you want to be open, you need to have this openness of diversity of opinion, of understanding for each other's opinion, and of the safety to speak about it. Jim Dator once said, any useful idea about the future should appear to be ridiculous, okay? Which doesn't mean that every ridiculous idea is useful, right? But still, you think about it, a lack of psychological safety, they'll damage any ideas that will come from a diverse group. How often have you heard someone say, don't waste time with that, that's crazy? So this is the type of stuff that I'm working on with colleagues, essentially thinking about mapping people in teams into this three-dimensional space of saying, where are they in terms of empathy, in terms of safety, and in terms of diversity? And we haven't finished mapping out everything. There's been good work done mapping safety and diversity into a number of spaces where we realize that teams that are high on diversity but low on safety, they tend to be opposed to each other. Teams that are low in both, they tend to be very scared and defensive, right? Teams that are high on safety but low on diversity, all thinking the same, they tend to be very uniform in their thinking. But what we're looking for we are analyzing and looking psychologically for what we call generative behaviors. These are behaviors that are typical of teams that have a high degree of safety and a high degree of diversity. We're looking in the way that they act. Are people curious about others and their ideas? Are they encouraging and supportive? Are they resourceful? Are they able to come up with novel solutions? Are they flexible and able to change? Are they willing to take risks and experiments? And do they appreciate each other? These are the behavior patterns that we're looking for and that we're trying to nurture in these groups. What we're trying to get away from is a strongly hierarchical command and control type of culture, a conforming behavior, people being cautious and risk avoidant, people being resistant to new ideas, micromanaging, and being very directive. Okay. So any organization has this culture, has its culture, and the culture is the reason the organization has been around. And what we're trying to do with our work is not only analyze, but figure out what type of interventions can we do to support the generative behaviors while not disturbing the culture too much. Okay? Because what we tend to see, if we look in these different domains, are different types of conflict that we come into, and also on the other side, openness and support. I'm sorry that I'm running out of time. I really would have liked to go on in and do a case study, but this is the best 30 minutes of a half-day workshop and training that I do on this. But I would like to give you just a couple of things that came out of our research to take away. First, you can't buy psychological safety. If some consultant comes in and says, I will give you a talk and I will coach you and then you will be safe, run away. Secondly, focus on diversity and inclusion. That's the easiest starting point. Once you have diversity and inclusion, people will start empathizing with each other relatively quickly. And growing out of that, growing from this diversity and empathy, that will start leading to psychological safety. Another thing is to realize there are trained professionals, psychologists who actually work on this, who can actually really work with your teams and help you. And we have other tools than the ones that are just available out on the internet. And last, don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. Okay? As an inspiration, I'd like to leave you with this. This is how simple inclusion can be. It's just doing something like that. Okay? So there's a bunch of people I work with, a bunch of people who support me, who I would like to thank here. And also, I would like to point out to you that this is real research. This is real serious psychology research. And here are some references. And here are some more references. And I have some more references and even some more. And by the way, there's a couple more pages of references. And this is actually just the short version of this bibliography. So I only actually got through 10 pages on this, which I think is enough for a 30-minute talk. But if you want to find out more about this, please get in touch. What I'd like to get feedback from you before we go on with this is one last question on Menti. What words come to mind for you after hearing this? Just short introduction to this. What words come to mind? Would you please go into Menti and just give a short feedback?
Joseph, thank you very much for your talk and all the work that you do in this research as well. While we're waiting for those words to come in, do you mind if we take a look at some of these questions that we have lined up for you?
Okay. Just hold on for a second. Need more women? Yes. Women is interesting because Woolley and Malone, the only thing they noticed in the beginning was the correlation between the number of women. And they thought originally that wasn't a factor. they thought that was a moderating variable on empathy because women tend to be more empathic than men, but they actually found with the statistics they did that it was a separate factor. What I believe is important is gender diversity is only one aspect of a larger type of diversity. And that diversity tends to come in more in the direction of cognitive diversity, that people think in different ways. Cultural diversity can also be expressed in terms of cognitive diversity. Okay, culture is everything, and bullshit. Excellent. Okay, want to apply. If you want to get in touch with me and stuff like that, let's go on. There's this one thing about LinkedIn that I like to say. I'm happy to hook up with people on LinkedIn, but I'm not interested in collecting contacts. So if you want to link up to me and I don't know who you are already, please write me a message and tell me who you are and what's interesting for you. LinkedIn recommended you, or you should know me already. That doesn't count. Okay, I appreciate it. I'm quite happy and open to get in touch with people, happy to open to answer your questions and help you. But please do the courtesy of just writing me just a couple lines and say, hey, I heard you talk at this conference. That's cool. Could we get in touch? Okay. So now we get to the other questions. Before we go on, Zoltan will read in the questions. I just want to point in one last thing. The difference between questions and discussions is this little story. The teacher asked the class, does anyone have any questions? And everybody put their hand up. Then the teacher said, remember, a question is when you want more information. If you want to tell me something about yourself, that's a discussion. That's time for that later. We can do that later in Hopin, okay? Then everybody put their hands down. So we have some time for questions now, for a discussion. If you want to tell me about your experiences, I'll be hanging around in Hopin later, okay? So do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. We have a whole lot of them, actually. I will do my, I think that these all actually qualify as actual real questions, so that's awesome.
Okay.
I'm just gonna go by like order of votes. Henrietta is asking, what should be the first steps to end a hierarchical work environment to a more psychologically safe one?
I think if I knew that answer, I would be, I'd be rich. But my personal view, what I think very strongly is trust. Building up trust. Trust means only promising what you can deliver and delivering all that you promise. And there's one exercise that I often do in my trainings. I ask people to answer the question or fill in the blanks. In this situation at work or something else, I feel I can be myself. If I can do something, fill in the blank, and you will do or you won't do something. And just get people to express something that I trust I can do something, and you won't do something. You won't yell at me, or you will do something for me. So I tend to start looking at the basis of trust. My colleagues focus a lot more on diversity and inclusion. The thing is, with diversity and inclusion, that's probably the easiest of the three, that, empathy, and psychological safety, to actually start doing. But still, in an organization, that takes a lot of buy-in from management in order to get people to shift around teams to make them more diverse, things like that. The fact of building up trust with each other, that's an easier step. I wish we really had more time to go into detail about that. Maybe I'll do that for my next talk. But that's the point where I start setting, in this context, what would I feel comfortable if I could do something and I know that something else would happen or wouldn't happen? Okay?
That's great. Thank you very much. We have our next question asking, would you change something in that Google factor list that you showed us? Why or why not?
Let's say that, this is a public stage. And I've had conversations with the researchers at Google behind the scenes. And there are a couple of things that I think I and my colleagues, should I mention my colleagues, among others, are Alison Reynolds and David Lewis of the London Business School, who are also in the Thinkers 50 list, who've been doing groundbreaking research with that. And I've working with them on that. There are a couple other things that I would approach in a different way. Because to make it simple, Google didn't just discover this. Google had a list of factors already in place in the beginning. So they weren't doing exploratory research, they were doing confirmatory research. And I would have been interested, the reason that Woolley and Malone found out about diversity is because they were doing exploratory research and they found out, oh, there's something else that plays a role here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate that. Can you share more activities for teams or some more information about that Sudoku activity that you mentioned?
Oh, okay. I actually took out a slide that I normally would do as an exercise. You want an exercise, do this one with your team. Your team has 2 minutes time to come up with as many mathematical equations as possible that equal the number 13. Okay. You can use any mathematical operators that you want to. Okay. Any mathematical operators that you want to as often as possible, but the numbers between 2 and 10 are the only numbers you can use, right? And you can only use those numbers once each. Okay. So actually, if you don't mind, I am going to just bring that slide up. This is another version of it. Hold on for a second. So when I do it with individuals, 90 seconds. With a team, you have 2 minutes to brainstorm as many unique equations as possible that equal the number 13, just using the numbers between 2 and 10. You can use the maths operators as often as you want, but you can only use the numbers between 2 and 10 at most once per equation. So you can do 5 times 2 plus 3, but you can't do 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3. And permutations don't count. Now, if you do this with a team, what you need to do is you need to put this exercise, put the answers into an Excel sheet in one column with no spaces in between, and get that done in 2 minutes. One thing you might want to watch out for, just a warning, if you have mathematicians in your group, that you might come up with answers like this. Okay? But remember, what we're looking at is not only the answers. What we're looking at is seeing how do the people interact with each other in a stress situation. Okay? And that's just a fun exercise to do. Given 2 minutes time to do this, the answers have to be in an Excel sheet, all in one column, and no spaces in the rows. Okay, so that saves them from somebody saying, okay, I'll take the first 10, and then you start at number 10 and go to 20. Okay, have fun doing it. Let me know how it works out.
Nice. But that sounds like a fun, challenging cooperation exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, so these are the type of exercises that we do, or a lot of them are just like that. Okay, next.
Yeah, we do have time for a couple more. Let me just see. Just scanning down the list keeps ordering itself by the votes. Next one is from Julia asking, doesn't observation as a research method open the door for many other biases like the presence of the performer inducing altered behavior, the bias of the observer, etc.?
What we've noticed, and this is also something that came up in Engel et al. 2014, they did the research first with teams live, and then they did it virtually to see if there was any difference. The observation in a virtual space is less noticeable and has less an influence than if you actually have these people in a room and are running the exercises with them. Also, doing it virtually allows you to use a number of different tools and a number of different methods than if you were doing it live. So yes, you potentially could have a Hawthorne effect, but in all the research that I know, and as I said, there's a lot of published research on this, this is a lot less than having to deal with things like self-report bias and monomethod bias. But a very good question. Thank you.
Awesome. We're kind of on time. Maybe one more quick one. Wow. Okay.
Uh-oh.
Maybe it won't be quick. Let's see. How do you measure the inclusivity of an individual?
How do you measure the inclusivity? Okay. There's a basic thing is, it's 1 over the total number of people in the team. It's the one thing. The other thing you're going to be looking at essentially is with what I showed you, the equality in turn taking, right? And you can go a lot further beyond that. So I just showed you the picture of the 2 teams where we were looking at the standard deviation of talking time. My PhD research, I took out the slides from that because that would be really scary, goes a lot deeper into that and starting analyzing on a psycholinguistic level, what are the words that people are actually talking? Are they sharing words? Are they sharing a context and doing sentiment analysis and things like that? And based on that, you can actually see how much a person is coming into a group and how much the group is accepting a person. That's really geeking out. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us.